It all began when humanity, blissfully unaware of the dangers lurking beyond the stars, received a message. The skies above Earth began to shimmer with strange lights, and unusual events unfolded across the globe. People whispered about the anomalies, technologies malfunctioning, random disappearances, and people feeling like they were being watched. The world was in chaos, yet no one knew why. Then, the message came. It wasn't a warning or a threat, but an order. The aliens, calling themselves the Zorathians, claimed to be the superior race in the galaxy, and they demanded humanity kneel before them. The message echoed in every language, on every screen, from every corner of Earth. Their words were cold and unyielding: submit to us, or perish. For the first time in history, the leaders of Earth gathered in secrecy. The message was clear, and there was no time to debate. The Zorathians had advanced technology beyond anything humanity had ever seen, and their power seemed limitless. The decision to submit was made quickly, not out of fear, but a sense of survival. The leaders knew what they were up against. The Zorathians had sent their fleet, and there was nothing that could stop them. As the world's governments prepared to broadcast the order to the masses, the atmosphere grew tense. People waited in fear, but no one was prepared for the shock that would come next. The Zorathians' command was not just a demand, it was a warning. They had already infiltrated Earth's communication systems. The moment the leaders broadcasted their message, everything would change. Across the globe, as people gathered around their screens, something even more unsettling happened. The lights in cities flickered, and electronic devices around the world began to behave strangely. Phones, televisions, and computers all malfunctioned, their screens displaying symbols and words that no human could understand. Then, it was as if a presence, invisible but undeniably real, was in the room with everyone. The Zorathians didn't need to say anything more. The world knew what was happening. Panic spread like wildfire. How had they known so much about humanity? How could they possibly be so powerful? And most of all, how could Earth's leaders make such a decision without knowing the true cost? Amid the fear and confusion, a small group of individuals began to question the aliens' true intentions. Among them was a scientist, Dr. Naomi Cruz, who was watching the broadcast from her lab. As the broadcast continued, she started to notice something strange. The Zorathians' power wasn't just in their technology, but in their ability to control human perception. They were able to manipulate minds and influence emotions, causing fear to spread across the globe. It was more than just an invasion, it was a psychological assault, a test of humanity's will to resist. Naomi wasn't just frightened. She was determined to understand this enemy. As the Zorathians' fleet loomed in the sky, casting their shadows over Earth, Naomi began to research the aliens, looking for any clue that might reveal a way to fight back. But every time she thought she was close, more strange occurrences happened. It was as though the Zorathians were always one step ahead. The aliens, who had claimed to be benevolent, promised that those who kneeled would be spared. But Naomi had a feeling that their promises were empty. Beneath their calm, calculated words, there was something darker. Earth's leaders could already sense it, but they had no choice but to follow the Zorathians' orders. The time had come for humanity to decide, would they kneel, or would they find a way to fight? As the first wave of the Zorathian fleet descended upon Earth, the world held its breath. The alien ships, massive and menacing, cast shadows over entire cities. It was clear that the time for negotiation was over. The invasion had begun. The Zorathians had made their demand, and humanity's response would determine its fate. But Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that the aliens had made a mistake. They thought they had calculated everything perfectly, but they hadn't counted on one thing, the human spirit. As the world waited for the inevitable, Naomi's mind raced. She had to find a way to awaken that spirit. She had to find a way to turn the tide, before it was too late. The stage was set. The Zorathians had ordered humanity to kneel. But this was just the beginning. What they didn't realize was that the greatest mistake they would ever make was underestimating humanity's will to survive. The world trembled under the shadow of the Zorathian fleet. Cities were on lockdown, entire populations in fear, and the powerful alien ships in the sky loomed ominously above Earth. The leaders of humanity had already made their decision: submit to the Zorathians and hope for mercy. The order had been broadcast, and the world stood at the brink of collapse. But in the midst of this despair, a whisper began to grow louder. Dr. Naomi Cruz, the scientist who had felt the first spark of suspicion, could not shake the feeling that humanity's response had been all wrong. She knew something the rest of the world didn't. While governments and world leaders scrambled to prepare for the worst, Naomi had uncovered a piece of history that had been lost, hidden away in ancient texts. It was a secret that had been buried for centuries, ignored by all, a secret that no one could have predicted. In the heart of her lab, surrounded by ancient manuscripts, Naomi's hands shook as she pieced together the truth. She had found a reference to an ancient power hidden deep within humanity's DNA. This power had once been unlocked in times of great danger, when humanity was pushed to the brink. It was not a power based on technology, strength, or weapons. It was something far more profound, something the Zorathians had completely overlooked. It was the power of human unity. The ability of humans to come together, to fight as one when all hope seemed lost. Naomi knew she had to act fast. She couldn't be the only one who understood the true nature of humanity's strength. But the more she looked into it, the more she realized that the aliens had not only underestimated humanity's will to fight, they had underestimated the potential of hope. And hope, when harnessed, could be the key to saving the world. As Naomi began to reach out to others, her words spread like wildfire. She was not alone. More and more people started to believe, not in the aliens' promises of mercy, but in the possibility of resistance. Small groups began to form all over the globe, people from all walks of life, ordinary citizens, scientists, soldiers, and students, all united under one cause: to fight back. They called themselves the Awakened. The first step was clear: they had to strike back against the Zorathians' technological grip. The aliens had a sophisticated network that controlled Earth's communication systems, manipulating both information and fear. The Awakened realized they could use that to their advantage. If they could disrupt the aliens' ability to control humanity's thoughts and actions, they could buy themselves time to form a plan. It was a risk, but it was the only one they had. Naomi, along with a team of hackers and engineers, worked tirelessly to infiltrate the Zorathian communication system. The goal was to send a message back to the Zorathians, not one of submission, but one of defiance. But the challenge was immense. The Zorathians' technology was far beyond anything Earth had ever seen. Every move was watched, every plan tracked. Still, Naomi believed that the one thing the aliens didn't understand was humans' ability to adapt. The days that followed were tense. As the aliens continued to tighten their grip on Earth, the resistance grew stronger. Each successful mission, each tiny victory, fueled the flames of rebellion. The Awakened began to operate in the shadows, sabotaging alien supply lines, freeing people from Zorathian control, and spreading the message of resistance. But there was one problem. The Zorathians had become aware of Naomi and her growing resistance. They knew that humanity was not simply bending to their will. And they didn't like it. The aliens had underestimated the human spirit, and they weren't going to let it go unpunished. Naomi's team had just completed their most successful strike yet, sending a message to the Zorathian fleet. It wasn't much, just a simple, defiant declaration: "We will not kneel." But it was enough to send a shockwave through the alien ranks. The Zorathians immediately launched a counterstrike, focusing their efforts on Naomi's location. With their movements growing more desperate, the resistance had to make a choice. Stay hidden and bide their time, or risk everything in a final, all-out assault. Naomi knew that the aliens' next move would be their most dangerous yet. They wouldn't just destroy the resistance, they would try to crush humanity's spirit entirely. As Naomi gathered her team together, she realized that the final battle was near. The Zorathians would soon come for them, but they didn't know what they were truly up against. Humanity wasn't just a species to be ruled or enslaved. It was a force that, once awakened, could never be subdued. In a small underground base, Naomi's eyes burned with determination as she spoke to her team. We have one chance. We can't let them destroy what we've built. This isn't just about survival, it's about showing the galaxy that humanity won't kneel. The first part of their plan was simple: hit them where it hurts. Naomi knew that if they could deal a blow to the heart of the Zorathian fleet, they could shatter their confidence. But to do that, they needed a secret weapon, a weapon only humanity could wield. And that weapon was something the Zorathians had failed to understand: unity and determination. They were ready. The resistance wasn't just a group anymore, it was humanity's last hope. And they were about to prove that they would never kneel. The air was thick with anticipation. Humanity's first real strike against the Zorathians had not gone unnoticed. Naomi Cruz and the Resistance had made a powerful move by disrupting the alien fleet's control, sending a message that could not be ignored. But it came with a price. The Zorathians retaliated swiftly, launching full-scale attacks on the Resistance's hidden bases. It seemed like the aliens were everywhere. Every corner of the Earth was under surveillance, every move scrutinized. But the Zorathians had made a crucial mistake. They had underestimated humanity's greatest asset, their ability to adapt, to fight back in ways that the aliens could never predict. Naomi realized something as the Resistance grew bolder: humans were not just resilient, they were innovative. The aliens might have superior technology, but humanity had something more powerful: the ability to learn and evolve in the face of adversity. As the days passed, Naomi and her team continued to make small victories, chipping away at the Zorathians' grip on Earth. But it wasn't enough. The Resistance needed something more, something that would turn the tide of the war. Naomi began to dig deeper, reaching out to the people who had always been the heart of human progress: scientists, inventors, and thinkers from across the world. She needed answers, and she needed them fast. One night, while reviewing old research papers from ancient civilizations, Naomi stumbled upon an old text that caught her eye. It was from the earliest records of human history, long before Earth had seen the rise of modern technology. The text spoke of a forgotten force, a hidden energy that humans had once tapped into in times of great peril. It was not a weapon or an advanced form of technology, it was something much more primal, something rooted in the very essence of humanity. This force was emotion, the collective strength of the human spirit when united under a common cause. Naomi realized that the Zorathians had completely overlooked the one thing that gave humans their true power: their ability to come together in the face of impossible odds and push forward with unwavering determination. While the aliens relied on their technology, humans had the power to move mountains when united. The key to defeating the Zorathians wasn't in technology or physical strength, it was in their willpower, their capacity for collective action and sacrifice. But how could she harness this power? Naomi began to formulate a plan. She knew that if she could tap into humanity's emotional strength, she could unlock something the Zorathians could never defeat. The idea was simple but revolutionary: she would create a signal that could amplify human emotions, a wave of hope and defiance that would spread across the world. If every person on Earth felt the same unity, the same drive to fight, they could collectively create an energy field powerful enough to disrupt the Zorathian systems. As Naomi worked tirelessly on her plan, she realized she needed help, real help, from people who could believe in her vision and fight for something greater than themselves. It wasn't just about fighting back anymore. It was about uniting the human race, reminding them of the strength they held within. Across the world, the resistance grew stronger. Naomi's plan spread like wildfire. People began to believe in the impossible. Soldiers, scientists, workers, children, all came together in support of this audacious idea. They weren't just resisting the Zorathians anymore. They were fighting for their very identity, their future. They were fighting for humanity. As Naomi gathered the resistance's best minds and forces, they began the work of amplifying human emotion. It wasn't just technology, it was a movement. They created devices, scattered all over the planet, that would release a powerful, resonant signal, tuned to the frequency of human emotion. The more people who joined the cause, the stronger the signal would become. The resistance also began training people to harness their own emotions, teaching them how to focus their collective energy into a single, unified purpose. The message was clear: you are not alone. You are part of something much bigger than yourself. Naomi believed this would be humanity's ultimate weapon. She called it the pulse. Meanwhile, the Zorathians were becoming increasingly frustrated. Their attacks on Earth had failed to bring the resistance to its knees. In fact, they had inadvertently made humanity stronger. The more they fought, the more united Earth became. The aliens had no idea that the very thing they had sought to control was the very thing that would defeat them. The time for small victories was over. The resistance had now reached the point where they were ready to launch the pulse. Naomi stood at the center of it all, feeling a mixture of hope and fear. If it worked, it would be humanity's greatest triumph. If it didn't, it could be their final stand. But the Zorathians were not blind. As Naomi's team worked to complete the pulse, the aliens began to deploy their most advanced forces, preparing to wipe out the resistance once and for all. But the more the pulse resonated, the more the Zorathians began to feel it. It was as if a storm was rising, one fueled by humanity's raw, unshakable will. The battle had shifted. No longer was it about technology versus technology, strength against strength. It was about humanity's power to rise above and fight together. Naomi knew that this was the turning point. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore, she was fighting for the very soul of humanity. The pulse was ready. And with it, humanity's fate hung in the balance. The night sky over Earth had never looked so menacing. The Zorathian fleet hovered ominously, their ships like dark clouds blotting out the stars. Humanity had no illusions left, they were not in control. The world's leaders had given in, the resistance had fought hard, but the aliens were always one step ahead. But then, a spark ignited within the hearts of those who had refused to kneel. It wasn't just the technological prowess of the aliens that they had to contend with, it was something far more powerful, the human spirit. Naomi Cruz stood on the command deck of one of the last resistance strongholds, a makeshift command center carved beneath the ruins of an ancient city. Her hands trembled, but her heart was steady. The pulse was ready, humanity's last hope. Now, it was time to act. The first wave of Zorathian ships had begun their descent, their weapons primed for destruction. Cities lay in their path, already crippled by months of attacks. But humanity had a secret. The pulse, a signal made up of nothing more than raw human emotion, had spread across the world like a wildfire, gaining strength by the hour. Naomi's vision had come to life, the collective force of humanity's will, amplified and focused. The resistance's strategy was clear: strike at the heart of the Zorathian fleet while they were still unaware of what was coming. The pulse would resonate across Earth, disrupt the Zorathians' communication network, and, with any luck, create enough of a power surge to disable their control systems. It was a gamble, a desperate, risky move, but it was their only shot. As Naomi watched the holographic map in front of her, she felt a wave of determination that almost took her breath away. It wasn't just a battle for Earth anymore, it was a battle for humanity's very identity, its future. And it wasn't just Naomi or the resistance fighting now. The pulse had connected millions, sparking a collective fight that transcended boundaries, ideologies, and nations. The world had become united in a way it never had before, and the Zorathians had not seen it coming. Naomi's heart raced as the first wave of resistance forces moved into position. They had to attack quickly, before the Zorathians realized what was happening. With each step forward, Naomi felt the pulse amplifying, each person's hope, fear, and determination vibrating in unison, resonating through the air like a physical force. As the first resistance strike teams clashed with the alien forces, Naomi felt the shift. The Zorathians were panicking, struggling to maintain control over their once impenetrable systems. Their ships were beginning to malfunction, their weapons misfiring, their coordination faltering. The aliens had relied on their technology to dominate, but now, something was unraveling. The pulse was not just a signal, it was a wave of collective energy that no alien technology could comprehend. Every act of resistance, every person who believed in the cause, contributed to the pulse's growing strength. Naomi could feel it, almost like a hum in the air, a wave of emotion, of defiance, pushing back against the Zorathians' oppressive might. But then, the Zorathians retaliated with a force that sent a chill through Naomi's spine. A massive fleet of reinforcements arrived, more powerful and deadly than any before. The sheer scale of their force was overwhelming, and for a moment, it seemed like the resistance was doomed. Their weapons began to charge, preparing to fire upon Earth's remaining strongholds. Time was running out. Naomi's mind raced. The pulse was still growing stronger, but it wasn't enough yet. There was only one way to ensure the final victory: the pulse needed to be focused, directed straight at the heart of the Zorathian fleet. Naomi knew what she had to do, but it came with a price. She made the call. The last remaining resistance ships would perform a suicide mission. They would charge directly at the Zorathian command ship, carrying with them the full power of the pulse. Naomi and her closest allies would ride with them. As the ships prepared for their final assault, Naomi gathered her team. She knew that this was it. There was no turning back. But as she looked at the faces of the people standing beside her, soldiers, scientists, civilians, all united for one cause, she knew that this was humanity's greatest strength, their ability to rise when all seemed lost. They had the courage to face the unknown, to sacrifice everything for their future. The battle raged on as the resistance ships moved forward, pushing toward the Zorathian flagship. Every moment felt like an eternity as the final attack began. Naomi's heart pounded in her chest as they neared the alien ship, the pulse growing stronger with each passing second. And then, as the resistance ships collided with the Zorathian fleet, something incredible happened. The pulse, focused and amplified, shot out in a burst of pure human emotion, crashing through the Zorathian defenses like a tidal wave. It wasn't just technology, it was humanity's essence, raw and unfiltered, crashing against the invaders. The Zorathians were thrown into disarray. Their systems failed, their ships spiraled out of control. They had never experienced anything like this. The pulse shattered their mental control, breaking their will to fight. It was the moment the resistance had been waiting for. With the Zorathian fleet in chaos, the remaining forces on Earth launched their final assault. Humanity's spirit, its unity, and its hope had become its greatest weapon. The aliens were in retreat. But as the Zorathian flagship crumbled and the fleet began to scatter, Naomi knew this wasn't the end. The battle for Earth was not over. The Zorathians may have been broken for now, but they would regroup. The fight for humanity's freedom had only just begun. And somewhere, deep within her, Naomi felt the stirrings of something new, something the Zorathians would never understand, the unstoppable force of a species that had learned to rise together, no matter the odds. The victory over the Zorathian fleet was supposed to be a moment of triumph, a celebration of humanity's resilience and unity. Yet, as Naomi Cruz stood amidst the wreckage of the alien ships, she could not shake the nagging feeling that something bigger was coming, something even more dangerous than before. The pulse had worked, against all odds, it had been humanity's greatest weapon. The Zorathians, overwhelmed by the sheer force of human will, had retreated, leaving behind a world still scarred by their presence. But Naomi knew this was only the beginning. The Zorathians, though beaten, were not a species to admit defeat. They would return, stronger and more determined. As Naomi and the Resistance's leadership celebrated their hard-won success, their victory felt bittersweet. The world had been changed forever, and not just by the alien invasion. Humanity had been forced to confront its own vulnerabilities, its weaknesses, and, ultimately, its greatest strength. But there was no time for reflection, not yet. The Zorathians were gone, for now, but they would return, and humanity had no choice but to prepare. Days passed, and the uneasy silence was broken by troubling news. Across the stars, the Zorathians had begun to regroup. The alien race, embarrassed by their defeat, was not one to leave things unfinished. They had learned from their mistakes, and now they were preparing for something much worse than the last invasion, an entire fleet, larger and more powerful than anything humanity had ever faced. And this time, they weren't coming just to subjugate, they were coming to annihilate. Humanity's victory had made an impression, yes, but the Zorathians had learned the hard way that Earth could not be taken lightly. Naomi knew this was coming, and so did the resistance. What they had once thought was a final stand was now only a temporary reprieve. The leaders of Earth, those who had survived the invasion, gathered in what remained of the underground bases, looking for answers. The resistance, now united more than ever, had to find a way to defend their home before the Zorathians returned. The pulse, though powerful, would not work a second time. The aliens had now fully understood the power of humanity's collective will. They wouldn't make the same mistake again. It was time to go on the offensive. Naomi stood before a massive holographic map of Earth's remaining defenses, her mind racing. The Zorathians had technology far beyond humanity's understanding, but the pulse had shown them that they couldn't control humanity's greatest asset, its unpredictability. As Naomi scanned the map, an idea began to form. The pulse had tapped into human emotion, turning it into an energy that disrupted the Zorathian systems. But humanity had more to offer. They were adaptable, resourceful, and, most importantly, they could change their tactics in the heat of battle. The resistance would no longer be just a reactive force. They would adapt, they would innovate, and they would fight smarter. Naomi knew the stakes had never been higher. The Zorathians would come back stronger, faster, and with a new weapon, and Earth would have only one chance to survive. As the resistance leaders and engineers worked around the clock, Naomi and her team set out to build something even more powerful than the pulse, a weapon of their own design that could be used against the Zorathians in ways they never anticipated. They began developing technology that could manipulate and twist the very fabric of the Zorathians' communication systems, effectively hacking into their mental control network. If the pulse had worked by tapping into human emotion, this new weapon would work by turning that same power back onto the Zorathians. But time was running out. The Zorathian fleet was almost ready, and Earth's defenses were barely holding together. Naomi's team raced against the clock, constructing weapons that would counter the Zorathians' advanced technology. But the weapon they were designing had to be different. It couldn't just be another piece of machinery. It had to be something that would speak directly to the Zorathians' biggest weakness, their arrogance. The Zorathians had believed they could control everything, humanity, the pulse, the very future of Earth. But they had never truly understood humanity. They underestimated humanity's power to innovate, to evolve, and to fight for survival. Now, it was humanity's turn to show the Zorathians what they had failed to see. The new weapon would be humanity's greatest counterattack, an emotion-driven disruption field that could send ripples of chaos through the Zorathian fleet, destabilizing their systems, and causing them to collapse under the weight of their own arrogance. It would be a direct strike against the Zorathian hubris, their belief that they could simply crush humanity. It was the last card humanity had to play, and they had to make it count. As Naomi and her team tested the new weapon, there was an eerie sense of calm in the air. They knew that the final confrontation was coming, and the weight of the world rested on their shoulders. The resistance had won battles, yes, but this would be their most dangerous fight yet. They were preparing not just to defend Earth but to take the fight to the stars. And so, as the Zorathian fleet drew closer, humanity took its stand. They would no longer be the prey. They would become the hunters. With the new weapon ready and their spirits united, Naomi and the resistance were prepared to face the final battle. The Zorathians had made their mistake, they had believed that Earth would kneel. Now, humanity would show them the true cost of underestimating a species that would never bow.